This video we're going to be looking at a custom I made of a character that I want to make for years. I love the Ultraverse back in the 90s, back when it premiered in 1993 with Prime. Prime was my favorite Ultraverse character. And I remember like the local comic book shop selling out of Prime #1, and I went with my mom. That's back before I even had a driver's license. We went like 2 hours, a town 2 hours away from my hometown. And we stopped at a comic book shop out there, and they actually had this copy. I still have it to this day. It's like my favorite Ultraverse character. I've been toying around with a few different recipes throughout a few years and back and forth. I got out of customizing for several years, just with sickness in the family and other things. But last year, with getting to work from home, not going traveling much, I got back into customizing. And one of the things I wanted to do was finally make my Prime. I was going through my Marvel Legends collection, and I stumbled across, I think, thought it was the perfect body for Prime, and to me, it is the perfect body for Prime. Prime was a big, over-the-top, muscle-bound looking superhero. He's much on the lines of Captain Marvel, the DC's Captain Marvel, where he's a 13-year-old boy who transforms into a big, giant superhero. And with that being in mind, his real body is inside the Prime body. So I wanted a big, over-the-top, muscle-bound figure for Prime. I said that I've been planning this for years, just trying to find the right recipe for Prime. Like I said, I'm not quite happy with different things I've tried. One of the things I did do a few years back, I commissioned Glassman Customs to enlarge an Hyperion head for me. I was going to pull it's a upscaled Hyperion head. I did a little bit of resculpting, a little bit with the ears. One thing I didn't notice you don't notice with Hyperion when he's this scale, his ears are super thin. So I had to like reinforce the ears when I got enlarged. Had to do a little bit of resculpting in the enlarging process. The Hydraspan, it like lost some of the details of the hair, so I had to resculpt some of the hair. But when I was going through the collection, I got to start rearranging my X-Men villain shelf. I got looking at Caliban. With the Caliban, it hit me that this would make a perfect body for Prime. I actually got several of those heads from Glassman Customs. So when he was doing the enlarging commissions, they charges you so much for to make the molds, then like so much per head. So I ordered several of the heads just to have, since the big cost was just getting the molds made. I tried one on the Caliban body, and I loved the way it looked. It scaled properly, because I was actually going to originally use a Despero body for DCUC, and it's nearly the same size as the Caliban, but the Caliban's so much beefier body compared to the Caliban. It's got the jacked arms, the veins popping, and if you can see with the artwork for Prime, that's a must for the character. Big, bulked out, veins popping everywhere, muscle-bound brute. And the Caliban body fit that to the T. Couldn't ask for a better base to make a Prime. With finally finding the base to make my ideal Prime figure, I started with the process of actually sculpting what I needed to do on the chest. First thing first, I started laying down strips of styrene to map out where the armor's going to go. Then I used epoxy sculpt to start building up the armor. Then for the P, I actually sketched it out with a pencil, or how I want my P to look. Actually, have the P continue all the way up. When the ab crunch goes up, the P continues. It does break it when it crunches down, but it continues when it goes up. And after I sketched out the P for the chest, I took strips of styrene, thin strips, laid down on my pencil sketch, glued those down, and I started sculpting the P. Then to make the gauntlets, these are actually started out as Caliban gauntlets. I start laying down styrene strips, similar to like the tutorial I put on. There's a 3-step tutorial I did for sculpting boots. And that's what I did with these Caliban wrist guards. I used styrene to build a skeletal structure to sculpt on top of. I smoothed them, and the big thing was doing that is trying to make them look exactly the same. When you're doing that kind of work, mirroring is the hardest part. I was able to replicate on the mirrored side pretty well. And these are still removable. You can actually take the hands off and take the gauntlets off. For the cape, this cape is actually from GPS Slot on eBay. It's a wired posable cape. It's meant for the McFarlane Superman figure. And it attaches using magnets. I have magnets glued into the cape. And I embedded magnets into the upper torso. So then I resculpted over top of that. So now the cape is removable, and it holds nice and firm, and it holds poses just fine. And on the back of the cape, I actually painted a gold triangle on the cape. Then I applied a clear backed water slide to put the P on. With the cape off, we can let's do a little show of side by side of the Caliban with Prime. You can see the changes that we had to do with this. If you watch my tutorial on how to resculpt the lower legs and boots, you'll notice the shoes are actually from a Colossus on this one, a Marvel Select Colossus. And I resculpted the lower legs to fit with the smaller feet. We get a nice little taper. That's one thing about Prime, he was a big, huge, buff character. But he had like normal size hands and feet, the smaller size. That's what I was wanting to replicate with this, with Prime. And I was able to pull it off pretty well. Oh, and for the hands, I've tried mix and matching several different hands for Prime. But I tried with the in-game Build-A-Figure Hulk. I just thought those were too big. They worked with the arms and the size, but I just didn't like the size of the hands for the character I'm working on. I happened to stumble across on eBay, a seller was selling 12-inch Deadpool hands. And they fit my needs perfectly for the look I was going for with Prime. After getting all the sculpt work done with the gauntlets, the chest armor, the boots, the armor wraps around onto the back, continues up on here too. Then it was time for primer and paint. For the torso, I used a airbrush and did a gray primer. Then I did a white base, then yellow. Then I used the Citadel gold armor paint. I can't remember the name exactly for it. The skin tones are actually a custom mixture of Tester's paint I use. It's light tones, warm tones, a little bit of yellow, and a little bit of Tester's leather to get the skin tone that I use for Prime. I did highlights. I did shading onto the muscles. On the legs, I used the Tester's Guards Red. Then I did a black wash on that. Same with the hands. Same seller had the thumbs up hand. I thought the thumbs up hand worked really well with Prime. One of the things I want to do with Prime too, I really like how the Hyperion head looks for a neutral face for Prime. One thing I want it to have too is a smiling face. I always see these pictures of Prime with a big grin on his face. So the only way I knew how to do that is to try to splice in another head with a face that has a smiling face. And I picked up this All Might statue from My Hero Academia, which has a big grinning face. So what I ended up doing was making molds of my enlarged Hyperion head and the All Might head. Then I ran in resin at the castings. I spliced those two together. I made a grinning face for Prime. Oh, and the way I attach with these cast heads, I also have on the channel as a tutorial, I use O-rings. I drill them out and embed O-rings into these casting heads so they pop on really nice and firm. And now I have a really cool grinning face for Prime. We got the cape, the grin, and the attitude. It's Prime time. I couldn't have been happier with how this Prime turned out. I love the look, the bulk, how absolutely ripped the base body is. It is just perfect for the character Prime. And he still has all the articulation as the base Caliban body, with a ball joint on a disc hinge, up and down, left and right, disc hinge shoulders, bicep swivel, single jointed elbows, hinge and swivel wrist, and with the thumb hand actually hinged vertically, so you can point him at himself a little better. Ab crunch, front and back, waist twist, ball jointed hips that kick out farther than most Spider-Man figures, thigh swivel, double joint knees, and kicks his own butt. Hinged ankles, ankle pivots. One thing I did have to do with sculpting the boots for Prime, I actually had to get rid of the boot cuts on the Caliban. The Caliban, the boot cuts are at a weird slight angle, and the way I sculpted the boots, there was no way for me to keep that boot swivel and keep a clean look for the boots. It would have been nice if I would have been able to keep the boot swivel, but I like a cleaner sculpt better than a boot swivel. As for the scale of Prime, Prime was a big character in the comics. He was close to 8 feet tall. The Prime body is more of a construct around Kevin. Kevin Green is the kid inside. His height would range between 7'6" to 8 feet tall, something like that. So he's a big character, so I wanted a big base. So in case anyone doesn't have Caliban, I'll do a little bit of size comparison just to show how big he is. Here he is next to a couple other Ultraverse characters I made of Adam Bob using a DCUC body, and Solitary also using a DCUC body. DCUC bodies are pretty well standard, so you can see how big he is next to those. Here he is next to Bucky Cap and a Gamerverse Spider-Man. Here he is next to Hyperion and an 80th anniversary Iron Man. Here he is next to 80th anniversary Hulk and 80th anniversary Captain America. I have to say, this is one of my favorite customs I ever made. I was so happy I finally was able to get one of these made. I couldn't have been happier how it turned out. Like I said, I'm a huge Ultraverse fan, especially Prime. I have a lot of other Ultraverse characters I'm going to be making customs of. I have Hardcase in the works. I have another Solitaire, Adam Bob. I'm looking at getting the parts for make a Mantra, Electrocute they're going to be making. I actually had a friend of mine, Kevin Sharp, a comic book pro friend of mine. He actually has his own book coming out called Dragon Guard. And he was doing sketches for backers for his book. And back to the book, I got him to do a sketch of... I'm going to do a sketch of Prime for me, and I thought it turned out really good. And if you're watching, Kevin, thank you very much. Love the sketch, and I can't wait to get your book. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to watch the review of my custom. Please like, share, subscribe. I'll have some more cool customs coming up. Bye-bye.